Hello book lovers, and welcome back or welcome to Nat Cat's Bookish Cafe. Today I'm here to give you some book recommendations, books specifically written by Black authors. Alright guys, happy Black History Month. We are a little ways into this month, but I do want to go ahead and share some recommendations that I think are worth reading. I have decided that this is going to be a recommendation video that is more about quantity rather than, I don't want to say quality, but I'm not going to go very in depth with any of these book reviews. In fact, I wouldn't even consider them book reviews. If you've been around for a while, you know that usually I know how to chat about a book, but these I'm just going to give you the basics. I have never done a recommendation video specifically for Black authors, so I kind of looked at the books I've read in the last 2-3 years, so we do have a decent amount to get to. Obviously some of these I have not read for a while, so I will be digging around in my brain to remember exactly what I enjoyed about these, but I will say all the books on here I gave a 3.5 or above, essentially meaning that I felt they were above average reads and that I would go ahead and recommend them to people. I am splitting this up by genre. You'll definitely be able to see which genres I read more of. There's some categories where I literally only have 2 books to talk about, and then there's other genres where I have quite a few to discuss. And on top of that, I do have some books that I physically own, and then some that I read either from the library via Libby or maybe even KU. So essentially I will be going genre by genre, starting with the books I own and then getting into the ones that I no longer own. Obviously I will be talking about a teensy tiny fraction of books that are out there. I will not be including nonfiction in here, despite the fact that I have read a few. These are all fiction recommendations, but I would love to see your guys' recommendations down below. I have so many wonderful books on my TBR written by Black authors, so I would love to hear your praise about them, or of course to add them to my TBR. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the first category, and the teensiest, and that is going to be historical. All right, guys, so we're going to go ahead and start with The Prophets, and this is by Robert Jones Jr. This is a book that I read a few years ago, 2-3 years ago. At this point, time is blurring. I listened to this via audiobook just because of the historical setting and the dialogue being one I'm not particularly familiar with. The fact that it is historical and the fact that it is taking place more in the South means that a modern woman who, as myself, who lives in the North is not as familiar with the dialect. I really did enjoy the audiobook experience. This is a story about 2 queer Black men who are in slavery. In this book, we get multiple points of view of the men as well as those around him, and we also get a few flashbacks to these men's ancestors back in Africa and when they were first dragged from their land by the slavers. So this book is definitely an emotional read. If you're looking for a happy book, do not look here, but if you are looking for a book filled with strong emotions and beautiful writing, then this is definitely the place to go. And the second of the 2 historical books, we have Don't Cry for Me by Daniel Black. Now this is one of those books that kind of follows a man through his entire life, so it is partially historical, partially contemporary, but I decided to put it under the historical category. We are following a Black father who is dying and is writing a letter to his queer son, kind of explaining his life and how this life made him the man that he is, a man who was not really able to accept his son as he is. In a way, it is kind of an apology as well for his behavior. I have heard that the author is releasing a book called, I believe it's called Isaac's Song, which is a book about the this man's son, and I will definitely be checking that out. Another rather small category is going to be sci-fi. I always want to be a sci-fi girly, but I feel like I just never quite get there. So I only have two authors to talk about here. The first one is going to be Neil Shusterman with his Scythe series. This is a well-beloved series. It is a YA sci-fi where we are dealing with a society that has conquered death, and we are following two young people who are becoming apprentice scythes. And scythes are the people who are to control the human population, because no one dies naturally anymore, but obviously we can't just keep growing. There's only so much room on the planet, and things go a little bit from utopia to dystopia. So I had a great time with this series. I definitely need to go ahead and reread it, but if you haven't gotten to it yet, it is a must read. As far as the ones that I don't physically own, we have Nnedi Okorafor. I definitely need to read more books by this author, but so far I have read Remote Control as well as the Binti series. Remote Control, as far as I know, is a standalone. We are following a young girl who finds a seed, and this seed seems to kind of change her as a person, and she is being chased by people who want to possess this seed. On the other hand, we have the Binti trilogy. This is a trilogy of novellas that I quite enjoyed. In this book, we are following a very intelligent young woman who wishes to go to university far away in another galaxy, but her community is very close-knit and is very opposed to people leaving the community, but she decides to go anyway, and unfortunately for her, the spaceship she is on ends up being slaughtered by a alien race, and she is the sole survivor. And in a way, she kind of uses her connection with these aliens to create peace between this alien race and those that they have deemed as slighting them. So I thought this was a very interesting series. I really enjoy Nnedi Okorafor's writing, characters, plots. I know that they have a pretty decent backlog that I definitely need to get to, and I know that they're still writing books that are making it onto people's most anticipated lists. So if you haven't picked them up yet and you've been wanting to try sci-fi, I think they are a good start, especially since all the books I've read from them are pretty short. So, you know, it's a good way to dip your feet into that genre. All right, that was it for sci-fi. So let's go ahead and jump into fantasy. I've always considered myself a fantasy reader, but I feel like lately, when I look back at my reading, it's not 100% the case. I think I definitely was reading more fantasy when I was very young. So I definitely want to get to it more here now as an adult. But as far as fantasy authors, the obvious answer, N.K. Jemisin. I know that some of her books, maybe even these two, can be considered slightly sci-fi. I know her Broken Earth trilogy, which I have not read yet, would definitely be considered sci-fi. We have the Inheritance trilogy, which I am almost done with. I still need to get to that final novella, but that will be happening this month. This is a trilogy with 2 novellas attached to it. It is her debut novel, and we are following a plethora of characters. Some are human, some are gods, some are the children of gods. So if you are into fantasy where you have god characters, this is definitely a book for you. Then we have the Dream Blood duology. We have the Killing Moon, and the Shadowed Sun is the second one. It's kind of, where is it? There it is. This series, I believe, is her second, and it's just a duology. I would say at times this one creeps a little bit more into fantasy horror. I have to admit, I'm planning on rereading this one because I barely remember anything of the first book, but the second one had enough horrifying reveals for it to stick into my head. So I would definitely say that this one has quite a few trigger warnings in it, but we are dealing with kind of a dream-like magic where people are able to enter other people's dreams, and oftentimes they do this to help relieve people of pain and suffering and helping them pass on to the other life, but it seems like something else is entering their dreams, and when it releases them, their souls cease to exist, which is obviously a very bad thing. So I'm looking forward to rereading this. It was a very interesting series, and N.K. Jemisin for the win. So this next book I would say leans more magical realism, but I decided to put it into the fantasy category, and that is going to be Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. You will see this author again later. In this book, we are essentially following a multi-spirited person, and their other spirits are presented as these kind of godlike creatures that were roaming the world. And when our main character was born, for some reason they were pulled into her body, and they should have kind of morphed with her soul and become one, but that didn't quite happen, and so they are split kind of. And they also have siblings in the other realm that are not happy that they did not return home, and they kind of cause bad luck in this poor girl's life. I really love Akwaeke Emezi's writing. The story here is definitely difficult. We are dealing with someone who struggles very much when it comes to physical intimacy because she has faced multiple sexual assaults throughout her life, and sometimes that leads to very self-destructive behavior. Sometimes her personalities are on her side, sometimes not so much, and I just thought this was a wonderful book. It could definitely be considered within the LitFic genre, but I think because these other personalities are seen as these other spirits, that it could definitely fall into the fantasy category as well. And then we have Blood Debts by Terry Benton Walker. This is a book that I need to go ahead and reread because the second book came out, but it has been a moment since I read the first one. This is a young adult fantasy. I guess you would consider it kind of urban fantasy and maybe even slightly paranormal because they are witches. So essentially we are following a pair of twins, and their family once used to rule the witches of New Orleans. However, something occurred that led to kind of the fall from power for their family. At the beginning of this book, our siblings realize that their mother is in fact not dying of natural causes, but has been cursed. And so despite the fact that their family is no longer the primary power, it seems that someone still sees them as a threat. And so they need to look into that. I really enjoyed the first book. I'm looking forward to rereading it and continuing with the series. Next, we have The Ray Bearer duology by Jordan Efweko. And this is a book series that I no longer own because I loved the first book, but I was quite disappointed by the second one. So I ended up just getting rid and unhauling the duology, but I still would definitely recommend this. We are following a young woman who is raised by a very controlling mother, and it seems that the young prince of their land is looking to build a council of people that he can rely on, and she is sent there to try and become part of this council, but also to try and kill him. I really enjoyed the world that we were in, the magic, the characters. The prince is presented as asexual throughout the series, so as an asexual girly myself, I did enjoy that representation. So despite the second book being a bit of a letdown to me, this is still a series that I would highly recommend. All right, now we're getting into some of the chunkier genres that I have a little bit more of. Let's go ahead and start with Kaysen Callender. I have read 3 books by him. The first book I ever read by them was Felix Ever After, then King and the Dragonfly, and then finally this is kind of an epic love story. I have enjoyed all of these. I would say their middle grade book, King and the Dragonfly, definitely impacted me the most. It was actually the first book I gave 5 stars, I believe back in was it 2023? Yeah, it wouldn't have been last year because I was reading only series continuations in January. So it would have been back in 2023. This book had a huge impact on me. And as you can see by the number of awards that it has won, it has definitely had an impact on a lot of other people. All of his books feature queer representation, young queer men. In this book specifically, we are following a young man whose brother has died, and he is kind of reacquainting himself with a young boy that he abandoned after he found that queer boy to be queer. But he himself is now starting to question his sexuality, and he's really struggling with that, especially because he's wondering what his brother would have thought of him if he was still alive and knew that his young brother had these feelings. In Felix Ever After, we are following a young trans character who is facing someone at school who is harassing them, and they think they know who it is. So I believe they start fake dating this person in hopes of turning around and hurting them. At the same time, they kind of start to realize that they actually really like this person. But at the same time, it seems like things between them and their friend is getting a little more complicated as well. And then this is kind of an epic love story. This is the one I think was my least favorite, and I'm trying to like rack my brain 100% about what was going on. The only thing I really remember is that we have a relationship between this young man and a young boy that he knew, and has come back to their school after a few years, and this young boy is deaf, or at the very least his hearing is bad enough where he does rely heavily on sign language. So that does have some of that representation in there as well. Up next, I said they would appear again. We have a quickie in Bezies, The Death of Vivek Oji. This was my favorite book of 2023. This is a book that will make you cry. I absolutely love this book. In this book, we are following kind of multiple timelines. The book starts obviously with the death of Vivek Oji. Their mother finds their body naked but wrapped in a beautiful blanket on her front porch and starts to set out to kind of figure out what led to this moment. And so we get to spend some time in Vivek's past. When he was a child, he seemed to have some sort of illness, and he also seemed to be a bit of an odd child. And then we watch him as he gets older, as he builds new relationships, a very strong relationship with his cousin, maybe too strong, some people would say. And we just get to watch Vivek as he kind of explores his sexuality. I kind of jump between he and they pronouns throughout this discussion, just because he often presents as male, but there are other times where they present as more feminine. So that's why I was kind of bouncing around. So I apologize if that got a little confusing. So I absolutely love this book. It is great when it comes to a queer commentary. Next, we have The God of Good Looks by Brenya McIver. This is a book that I read while reading other YouTubers' favorite books of the year. Otherwise, I probably would have never picked this book up and had honestly never heard about it before I watched that YouTuber's video. And this is a slight romance, but the romance I would say is so much in the background that I felt the need to put this in the contemporary LitFic category rather than in the romance category. We are following a young woman who lives in Trinidad, and she is trying to recover from a scandal in which she had been having an affair with a very wealthy, well-known man, and this has obviously negatively impacted her more than it negatively impacted the man, who was honestly doing just fine. And she one day gets offered a job, which she hasn't for a while because no one wants to offer her a job, and it is to work for this small beauty company that this man owns to see if she can go ahead and create a magazine for this company to help their sales. I actually had quite a great time with this. I think that it was a great redemption story of watching a woman kind of pick up her life and face those who are looking down on her and holding her to a different standard than they are the man that was involved with the scandal. And also there is a small relationship between her and this man who runs the company that I also enjoyed. Next we have The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is probably the book that I remember the least out of all the books on this list. It has been a while since I read it, and this is written in verse, which is not my favorite format, so chances are I just 100% don't remember what this book is about. I do think that we are in a way just reading about a young woman who is just facing a lot of challenges and decisions in her life, and she is using poetry to kind of walk herself through that and to express her opinion on all of that. I also believe that there is a romance in here, so if you're into verse, which I personally am not as much, I would definitely check out this, because I do see that I rated it relatively highly, which if I rated a verse book highly, it's gotta be a 10 out of 10 read. Finally, in this category, we have Sky Falling by Mia Mackenzie. This is, once again, a book that has a slight romance, but is definitely more LitFic contemporary leaning. We are following a young woman who often kind of tries to escape her life by doing tours around the world. She will get together a group of people and she will bring them there and kind of set up a vacation for them and give them a tour of the area. And one day in between her travels, a young girl comes to her and says that she is her biological mother. So this woman had given some eggs to a friend of hers who has unfortunately passed away, and this young girl is now being raised by her aunt. And we just kind of see this character as she kind of stops running from her life and becomes part of this child's life. And of course there is a slight romance between her and the aunt as well. All right, we're getting into the two biggest categories. First up, we have romance, and the first is going to be 7 Days in June by T.L. Williams. This is a well-known and beloved story, and we are following a female character who has chronic illness, a representation. She has chronic migraines. Both characters in this book are authors who spend 7 days together. Not a very healthy 7 days, because both of them were definitely struggling with some self-destructive behavior at the time, but they have now since found themselves together, and he is looking to prove that he is worthy of being part of her and her daughter's life. So I absolutely loved this story, just like most people do. Up next, we have the well-beloved Talia Hibbert. I only own Act Your Age, Eve Brown. This was my favorite of the Brown sisters duology, but there is also Get a Life, Chloe Brown, and then Take a Hint, Danny Brown. There we go. Those are the other two. And I have read some other books by this author. We have The Princess Trap, which I've quite enjoyed, as well as Work for It, which is her male romance. In this book, all three of the sisters either have chronic illness or autism representation, and they are all mixed race couples. I believe Talia Hibbert primarily does mixed race couples from what I know. I think all three of these are mixed race couples. So this one we are following I'm gonna go ahead and just focus on this one and not the other two, sorry. In this one we are following Eve, and she has just not been able to stick with anything in her life, and eventually her parents said enough is enough and they cut her off, and she kind of storms off and finds herself in this small town and sees that there is a bed and breakfast that is looking to hire a chef, and she's like, you know what, I'm going to apply for that. The interview does not go well, and then she runs the owner over with a car accidentally, and he is injured. And so his friend is like, hey, you can't run the B&B on your own anymore because your arm is broken. So why don't you hire the person that just hit you with a car to help you out? And obviously there is a romance between the two of them. On the other hand, with The Princess Trap, we have a woman who is working in HR? She's working in a school, and one day this very wealthy man shows up to see, I believe, about making like donations to the school, and he and her kind of have this connection, and they kind of start making out in an alleyway, and the paparazzi catches them, and she's like, what the heck, why did this random dude just take pictures of him? And he's like, oh yeah, so I'm kind of the prince of a small kingdom, and I've already had enough scandals, so if you could just pretend to be my fiance and that way it wouldn't be weird that I was making out with a random woman in an alleyway. And so that is kind of like a fake dating kind of situation. Then we have Work For It, which I would say is a small town male romance, and we are dealing with a big city boy coming to the small town and falling in love with a guy who works on a farm. We love to see it. Next, we have Only for the Week by Natasha Bishop. If you don't know this book by now, it has been everywhere, and I would say it is definitely worth the hype. This is set at a destination wedding where our main character's sister is marrying her ex-boyfriend, and everyone thinks it's weird because they think she still has feelings for him, and she's like, I don't. Like, I literally have no problem with this. Like, please stop making it weird. And she ends up kind of having a casual hookup with one of the groomsmen, and they decide they're just gonna have some fun during this time to take some stress off, and obviously things get a little deeper. Next, we have The Sweetest Remedy by Jane Igaro. This is once again one of those books where it kind of could have gone under the contemporary LitFic because I feel like it's a little less focused on the romance, but I felt like it was a big enough part to put it in this category. We are following a young woman who finds out that her father has passed away and has been invited to his funeral, and when she shows up, she realizes that his family there did not know that she existed, and they're not super happy to know that she is here. They kind of think she's here for the wrong reasons, but she's just like, I didn't know you guys didn't know. I didn't know my father at all. I just, kind of took this opportunity. And there was a man who was in a way almost like an apprentice or protege to the father, who, highly respected this father, and he's a friend of the family, and he and her have a bit of a connection. So it's a bit of a romance, but also her and this family drama that is occurring. Up next, we have Finding Joy by Adriana Herrera, and this is a story that is set in Ethiopia. There we go. It took me a second. It's set in Ethiopia. And we are following an aid worker who is an aid worker because both of his parents were, and his father had passed away a few years ago. And so while he kind of feels like he wants to do something else with his life, he feels like he can't leave this job because it meant so much to his father and therefore so much to his mother, and he doesn't want to disappoint her. However, on this trip, he ends up meeting this man who also works for the aid group, and they have a really strong connection. However, things are complicated because being queer is not legal within the country of Ethiopia. I do like that the author kind of talked a little bit about that. I wish she had gone a little bit more in depth, but the fact that we have an aid worker who's going into these countries to help its people, and oftentimes he has to almost like pretend like he isn't gay when he goes into these countries. And I can understand how that would be very frustrating for you to go into a country as an aid worker and feel like you are in a way in danger there because of your sexuality, or that you would be looked down upon when you are there only to do good. So I thought it was an interesting story and definitely worth checking out. Next, we have the Mead Mishap trilogy by Kimberly Lemming. This is just a fun fantasy romance. We have a demon, we have a werewolf, and we have a dragon, and each of them are falling in love with 3 different women from this one small town. So I think these are all a really fun, silly time. They are definitely the kind of books that'll make you laugh. I think the 3rd book was my favorite just because when it comes to companion novels, I really start to enjoy the kind of found family feelings that we get as we get to know more characters and they start to make more appearances in the other books with their couples and everything. So I really enjoyed the third one. I also felt like it had the most world building, and I'm a world building kind of girly. Up next we have Redemption by Kenya Wright, which is a Christmas story, but not like a super duper happy one. We are following a woman who is on the run with her 2 children from her abusive spouse, and a snowstorm lands her in the care of a man who used to, I believe, be part of the Yakuza, and he takes them in. He's more than happy to have them there. He's been alone for a very long time, and when he finds out that this little family that he started to enjoy the company of is threatened, he takes action. Next we have Trouble or Thruple. I never know. I don't want to say it's Thruple because there's no TH, but maybe I should look up how to say this word. Here's a picture of it. This is by Riley Adam, and this is a very short poly romance. We have a married couple who has been polyamorous their entire relationship, but there's never been any crossover until they meet this young woman and they decide they both want her, and they're more than happy to all be together because sharing is caring. I absolutely love this book. It did a great job discussing how important communication is within polyamory. I feel like that's always something that the author should focus on. It's not just about threesomes and foursomes, it is about strong communication between all members of the group. And we have Let's Talk About Love by Claire Kahn. This is a book that has a asexual main character. I believe she works at a library from what I remember, and she starts to form a relationship with a man. It is a pretty straightforward romance, but I did enjoy the asexual representation within it. All right, so that was the last romance. Let's go ahead and get into what I think is probably one of the biggest categories, and that is going to be horror, thriller, mystery. I think the reason that this is so large is because I really enjoy young adult horror that is written by Black authors. So let's go ahead and get into that final category. First, we have Alyssa Cole, her book When No One Is Watching, and then her newer book One of Us Knows, which I just recently finished. In this book, we are following a woman who is living in a neighborhood that is being gentrified, and it's being gentrified a little too quickly, and there are some suspicious things happening in the neighborhood, and that her neighbors are just kind of disappearing, and people keep saying they sold their house and left and moved somewhere else. But usually people don't just sell their house and move out overnight. So this book I thought did a really good job at showing both macro and micro racial aggression. So this book made me really uncomfortable, and I definitely is a little bit slept on because a lot of people seem not to like it, but I think it is a great book. As for her other book, I just read this at the end of last month and had a really great time with it. We are following a character who is DID, dissociative identity disorder, and she has woken up after being dormant for like 6 years, and one of her other personalities, one of her other headmates, is missing. The other headmates don't really know what's happening, but they are suddenly the caretakers of a manor on a island, and they are a little nervous to be there, especially when some unexpected guests arrive from their past that really tells them that they are in a little bit of danger. So I had a lot of fun with both of these books. I think Alyssa Cole does a great job with the thriller horror genre. Up next, another, I guess, slightly controversial book because it's not the most popular, but that is going to be Out There Screaming, which is edited by Jordan Paley. This is a collection of short stories, so an anthology, all written by Black authors. This has multiple genres within it: contemporary, historical, fantasy, sci-fi, a little bit of everything. I'm not always the biggest fan of short stories, but I I do think that this one had quite a few interesting ones in it. I thought there was enough diversity throughout the stories to really keep me entertained. So I know that, you know, a lot of people were kind of disappointed by this, but I had a really good time with it. So I do think it is still worth checking out, especially if you're wanting to get into like the horror genre. This is always a great way to sample some authors' work. Up next, we have Ace of Spades by Faraday Abeki Umedi. Unfortunately, I cannot recommend this author's other work, which is Where Sleeping Girls Lie. I did not like that book. That was very disappointing, but this one is one of my all-time favorite young adult horrors. In this book, we are following two characters who are the only Black students at a very prestigious high school, and they both get elected as prefects, I believe. Yep, senior prefects, and they start receiving text messages from someone known as A. So this is kind of said to be Get Out meets Gossip Girl, and that is exactly what this is. Things definitely escalate throughout this story. There is some queer representation. He is a young queer man, and she as well starts to form a relationship with a woman, or I guess a girl because they're teenagers, throughout this story. I absolutely ate up the ending of this book. Up next, we have You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight by Kaylin Byron, and this is kind of your classic camp slasher. In fact, they are working at a camp where a slasher movie was filmed, and people can go there to experience what it would be like to be in a slasher movie. And then one day things get a little complicated because the people that are supposed to be pretending to be dead seem to actually be dead. So I had a pretty good time with this book. I thought it was a fun, campy time, and I thought that the direction that the author took at the end of the story was a 10 out of 10 choice. Up next, we have Delicious Monsters by Lizelle Sambury. This is your classic I can see dead people scenario. However, the weird thing about this is that the new home that she and her mother moved to is not haunted. In fact, it's completely devoid of ghosts, which is somehow even more suspicious. So I would say that if you kind of want the inverse of a haunted house story, this was definitely very interesting, though there are quite a few trigger warnings in this one, so go ahead and check that out. Up next, we have There's No Way I Would Die First by Lisa Springer. This, once again, I guess would be campy. We have a girl who absolutely loves slasher movies, and she ends up throwing this Halloween party with some of the most influential people at her high school, and she ends up inviting this clown to show up and play hide and seek with them. Unfortunately, this clown starts killing people, and she is using all her knowledge from all the slashers that she has watched over the years to help her and her friends survive the night. Up next, we have The Taking of Jake Livingston. This is by Ryan Douglas, and in this book, once again, we have a character that can see ghosts, and unfortunately for him, he starts to realize that maybe he can be possessed by ghosts as well, when a very angry spirit of a white man who had shot up a high school near where our character lives decides to take over our character's body because he is not done with his revenge. So this is obviously a very horrifying concept, so obviously check trigger warnings and just make sure you're in the right headspace before going into it. Up next, we have Monday's Not Coming and White Smoke by Tiffany D. Jackson. I have enjoyed both of these authors' books. I will say Monday's Not Coming is definitely my favorite. I still think about the ending of this book to this day. I think about the ending of White Smoke as well because it was so disappointing and so sudden. I the moment I ended that book, I actually double checked to make sure that my audiobook wasn't glitching because I was like, did it just end? It took me a moment to wrap my head around that. Monday's Not Coming, we are following a young girl who, after not hearing from her friend all summer break, kind of expects to see her on the first day of school, but she's not there and no one seems that worried about it. On the other hand, we are following a girl who has moved with her family. Her mother has married a white man with a creepy young little white daughter, and they are moving into this fairly empty neighborhood. Essentially, her mom got a new job that comes with a free house because they are trying to rebuild this neighborhood. They have decided to move not only for our character's mom's work, but also because our character has been having some pretty big issues. She's been addicted to marijuana, and she also has a intense fear, a phobia, I would say, of bed bugs. Like, if she thinks that there are bed bugs, she will clean the entire house. She would possibly even burn the house to the ground because of an experience her family had with bed bugs. So this book definitely had your classic kind of this house is haunted scenario and there is something wrong with this neighborhood. We have the creepy white child and we have the suspicious business that is just giving out free houses. So it's got a lot going for it. I will say the ending is slightly disappointing, but everything leading up to it, I thought that the vibes were immaculate. Up next, we have Cherish Farah by Bethany Morrow. This is a young adult story where we are following a woman who would be considered a psychopath. Her parents decide that they need to go ahead and move so that they can find better employment, but our girl decides that she does not want that. And so she is moving in with her friend who is also Black, but is adopted by two wealthy white parents. And some things start to get a little bit unhinged while she is in the home, and luckily for her character, she is just as unhinged as those around her and is more than willing to go out kicking, screaming, drawing blood. So I had a good time with this book. I always think it's interesting to read from the point of a psychopath, and I do think that this was an intriguing story that doesn't have the highest ratings, but I would suggest is worth checking out. Up next, we have Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. This is an author I definitely need to check out again. This was a book I had a decent time, but I had similar issues to this book that I did with Don't Cry For Me by Daniel Black. They are in a way following similar topics. We have two fathers whose sons were married and ended up being killed in what was perceived as a hate crime. And while neither of these men were particularly supportive of their sons being gay and both have a criminal history, they obviously are not going to stand by and let someone just kill their sons, and they are out for revenge. So interesting story. Do wish that we dealt a little bit more with the feelings that our characters had about their sons and maybe some of the regrets they felt, but otherwise well written, and definitely will check out this author in the future. And finally, we have My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinke Berthwete, which I am so sorry if I butchered that. Not if. That I butchered that. And in this book, we are following a woman whose sister is a serial killer. She keeps killing her boyfriends, and our character keeps helping her clean up the mess. However, she is kind of in love with this man at her work, and then he unfortunately catches a glimpse of her sister and falls in love with her, and our girl knows that if she doesn't intervene, he will be next. So this was one of those books which I felt was like relatively decent for the majority of it, but the ending, standing ovation that the author decided to go in that direction. 10 out of 10 approve. of her decision to do so. All right, guys, so those are all of my recommendations. This video still ended up being relatively long, but I did my best to get through all of these as quickly as possible. I hope you found some new recommendations to check out. And again, I would love to hear your recommendations for books by Black authors listed down below within any of these genres. As always, guys, thank you so much for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!